here's my conundrum. VC money still flows west. Is that an opportunity for the region? Hi, good morning, everybody. Yeah, and welcome to the Web3 in APAC, Seizing Opportunities and Conquering Challenges panel. I'd like just to start with all the speakers kind of doing a quick little introduction about yourself. Ben?
Hello. Hi. My name is Ben. I'm with Jupiter. I run product and operation in Jupiter team. And yeah.
Hey everyone, my name is Lilian. I'm from Amazon Web Services, and I work on the Web3 team as well as on a team that looks after the largest unicorns and soonicorns in Southeast Asia.
Hey guys, I'm Adam. I'm working for Solana Foundation as an advisor.
Hi everybody, my name is Wei Zhou. I'm currently the CEO for Coins.ph. We're the largest exchange and crypto wallet in the Philippines.
Well, thank you everybody for coming onto this panel. So, I want to start off with kind of where Eno left off. So 6 out of the 11 highest concentration of crypto adoption, according to Chain Analysis, comes from the APAC region, right? And so I guess the first question is like, what are the clear and unique differences in the Web3 scene here in the APAC region versus, let's say, our American or European counterparts? And to follow up with that, like, what kind of advantages do those differences provide for the region?
I'll go first. Okay. I guess in my opinion, my personal opinion, by the way, is that so first of all, on Jupiter side, we see like the number of users pretty balanced out, like between APAC users and also US and Europe. It's like 50-50 still. For I guess APAC users are. I think that they have like more like the kind of like mentality of like, because getting into like a decentralized world, and then you just pretty much can do anything more, and then there's less restriction, right? So then they tend to experiment more on like the Web3 or like the crypto stuff over here. Or like that's what I think.
I think before I jump into that question, I feel like I have to like explain myself a little bit, like why is a cloud provider at a crypto conference? I think people probably don't think about AWS when they think about crypto. So I just wanted to say, I feel like cloud, like if you think about distributed, decentralized computing, like we're actually kind of OG Web3 in a way where we're truly enabling companies to distribute their compute power and compute capacity and run sort of a distributed system. So if you keep that in mind, what we found is that the builders in the Web3 ecosystem that have started to adopt Web3, especially because of the sort of lack of financial railways and like payment systems that are kind of more effective and sort of more unified in Southeast Asia, a little more fluctuation when it comes to sort of valuation of currencies. All the adoption is happening in Southeast Asia because of all that and like high mobile penetration. So even though there are things that are being built in the US, the adoption is closer here. And so I think what we're seeing now is like all of the sort of crypto companies that have started building in the US and are actually getting funding in the US are coming and launching in Southeast Asia. So if you look at EDX, for example, they've actually started building out a team here because they're only able to provide like 2 or 3 tokens in the US because the regulations are so tough. But the regulations in Southeast Asia and in APAC are so much higher. So I think like a few of those things have contributed to that. Like I think discussion we were having last night is like all these Web3 startups want to be closer to where their users are and closer to where they're getting direct feedback from their users and their customers to build better products. And that's all happening in Southeast Asia.
The users are here. That's
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I think like Southeast Asia or like in Asia in general, like the advantage is like the population. There are more users in the region. So if you're looking into like building the data or like the interactions, like this is the place to deploy. And then I think overall, because the population-wise, the consumer app layer was the most like advanced over, in my opinion, is over like other regions, because like people have different tastes, different habits, but in order to build something for billions of users or millions of users, you have to make it sure like the consumer app degree was pretty high. So I think that's like really produced a lot of developers in the region that actually can building like a million or even billion levels of a consumer product. That's a huge difference from the West and the East, and from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think Adam gave a really good overview on the developer side. I think I'm going to come a little bit from the consumer side, given that we're a retail exchange. And I think a lot of that just has to do with just a concentration of people and a concentration of young people. Like if you look at the Philippines, half of the population are under the age of 30. And it's one of the few countries in the world that actually has a positive sort of like population growth rate. And Philippines naturally is a sort of an English-speaking country. And I think all of that sort of converges on sort of, and the last bit point is like GDP per capita. If you look at GDP per capita, the Philippine average is about $500 a month, right? And then there's a lot more countries and people sort of who fit this type of profile that are actually willing to hustle for money. And that doesn't matter whether you're driving a bike or you're driving an NFT, or you're driving a DeepIn project. Like there are just ways people are just more willing to try things in terms of the hustle. And I think that's just sort of the nature out here in more so Southeast Asia. And then I sort of compare that to sort of like what I call the global north and the global south in terms of crypto usage. In the global north, people sort of view crypto as still as a speculative assets, and there's going to be a lot more restrictions on owning it and then even using it. Whereas in the global south countries, they view crypto more as an opportunistic asset, and they're willing to use it, and just that in itself, especially sort of that $500 per month GDP per capita number, and then where they can actually make money and earn a living using crypto and earning crypto. I think that's super, super different than anything else that has sort of existed, given that it is 24/7, all access. There's no barrier to entry into crypto almost. So that means that we see tremendous amount of growth in this region.
For sure, yeah. I think outside of Singapore, pretty much all Southeast Asian countries are positive birth rates, right? Vietnam, Malaysia. We make babies. That's what we do out here. We got users, and we make lots of babies. And I think that's really positive for the rest of the world. So here's my conundrum, right? So you've got all the users, and you see a room filled with developers and founders and great companies like Jupiter. But the conundrum I have is that despite the adoption in Asia, VC money still flows west, right? Despite like the tricky nature of U.S. regulatory, you've got an SEC that's kind of suing crypto companies constantly, both in Canada and the United States. The United States still gets 37.3% of the VC dollars. The UK gets something like 11%. So total, almost 50% of VC dollars in crypto go to those two countries. And then you got 10% that's left over going to Singapore, and I think 3% going to Hong Kong. So why is there such an imbalance there? Like, the population's here, the users are here, the founders clearly are here. So where's that? Is that an opportunity for the region? Oh, anybody can take this.
Yeah, I can maybe take a bit of a stab. I think that's kind of generally the case for the startup ecosystem and sort of investments in general. But I think one part of it that we don't talk about is like a lot of funding in Southeast Asia actually happens through sort of private networks, angel investors. That's not necessarily institutional. It's also a lot of kind of hedge funds that are sort of investing that you wouldn't really bucket under VC. So that's one aspect that maybe skews the data a little bit. The second thing is, I think even though like there's maybe more capital in the US, the growth rates are much higher in Southeast Asia. So having a smaller base provides much more opportunity for us to kind of grow more quickly. So I think that's also kind of a flip side of the coin where there's so much more potential, even if the VC dollars are in the US and sort of in the global north, as you mentioned, Wei. But we do see a lot of VC activity focusing on startups in Southeast Asia. In Singapore, there's Blockchain Founders Fund, there's Spartan Group, there's Tenedy, and we also see a lot of interest actually in VCs like Andreessen Horowitz, who are interested in specifically crypto Southeast Asia potential kind of investments. So we do have, like AWS has a whole team that works with VCs, and we bridge actually our Southeast Asia team with the US VC counterparts when the VCs that we're working with, they're interested in kind of understanding what the portfolio opportunities look like in Southeast Asia.
So it's going to grow, in other words.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I actually think a lot of it is, obviously for obvious historical and legacy reasons, but one problem that I see, and one thing that I think we can tackle this as an industry is actually developer talent. I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at sort of the success of the Web2 companies, there's only 2 countries in the world that have produced billion-dollar apps, right? America and China. I mean, that's where pretty much a significant part of these sort of developer ecosystems are, right? And I think we need to develop our developers, right? And that's something that we've been really proud of, sort of the work that Solana has been doing with their super teams. Like we're actually, like the Superteam Philippines, give a shout out to those guys. We've been working with them. They're actually going out and then actually, getting people to develop on Solana. I think that's an awesome initiative that these guys are building here. And just because, like, what is it? Like in China, people use Java. I guess in Taiwan, people use C++. There's just different languages that people use. And then it just a lot of times you just have to learn a different language to develop in Web3. And then sort of, I think talent is one. The second one, I think is just, even for us in the Philippines, we have a tough time hiring developers, right? Because in the US and in China, you can hire both cross the spectrum, but if you need to hire 30 iOS developers, you can probably do that pretty quickly as well. Whereas I think in Southeast Asia in particular, there's just a shortage of good developers. And I think that's something that'll take time, right? I mean, because I think if people are seeing these sort of outsized return and outsized opportunities, of course, you're going to go learn new languages and start working on projects. But I think it'll take one cycle, because I think last cycle is where we saw a large influx of people. Whereas this cycle, I think we're actually seeing we're going to see more local projects coming out. Because from the last cycle, we're already seeing successful projects and exchanges and businesses that came out of this region.
I also don't think that's an issue, right? The fact that all this VC money flows west. You've got a lot of great companies like even Jupiter and companies like Bird Eye. They've never taken $1 of outside capital, and they're what we consider unicorns, right? These guys are probably getting very close to getting to that unicorn status. So you don't have the pressure of paying back your LPs, the pressure of a VC board, and I think that's kind of part of the culture for Southeast Asia or the APAC region. Do you see that as an advantage?
Actually, talking about the funding part, right? So I think, Jupiter doesn't actually take any funding before. So I think that actually, or some of the trends that we're looking around the region is that it helps evolve into another model. I mean, it's not evolved. ICO has been around for a long time, but I think the launchpad model, it's getting more and more well adopted, right? Like Jupiter, we have a LFG launchpad where we help a lot of projects raise a lot of money. Yeah, I think that's sort of another alternative way for actually projects to look to raise money and not have to rely on VCs or even institute funders.
I agree. I think there is a lot of different pace. I think for the US, most of the time they're probably focused on fundamental layers, but even though a lot of projects building on in Asia is not the first one to innovate it, but we're always advanced to it. So for example, Jupiter is not the first one building the aggregator, but they actually the one that actually building it. Everyone uses it the most on Solana. So I think even though there's less dollar flowing too, but we see the trend is actually going up. There are more people looking into Asia and finding the developers here, the funding teams here are more sophisticated than the people in the US because they experience more. Even though it's like sometimes it's like a little slower, but I think in the long run it will be more advanced. So let's see. I think the trend is like shifting a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So let me ask about we're talking about users, and Wei spoke briefly about kind of like the topic areas. What do you guys think are the biggest opportunities that people should be building on in the APAC region, right? Given the young user base, given the fact that it's not as advanced, some of the infrastructure isn't as advanced as, say, some of the northern countries. What fields do you think the next unicorns come from, Lilian? Because you've got a lot of access to these new up and coming companies out there.
Yeah. It's not super sexy, but what we've seen, especially during kind of coming out of the bear market right now, like what has really been sort of successful and like has contributed to sort of a stable business is like if you build a B2B business like around, servicing financial institutions or other enterprises that want to bridge and enter into Web3. So we work with a lot of these sort of digital native hedge funds that are trying to enter into crypto, for example, and kind of start trading. And I think we've seen a lot of this during the bear market when prices are low, because that's when a lot of these financial institutions enter the market. They see the opportunity and the upside. So coming now into sort of this swing and the beginning of sort of market recovery and hopefully, fingers crossed, into the bull market, like there's a lot of opportunity into servicing these FIs and helping them basically bridge between Web 2 and Web 3. And that's all based on building like utility-based services versus just kind of going off of like token value, which I think obviously there's always going to be some part of sort of Web3 and crypto that's going to be like the meme coins and the altcoins. Like that's a part of the fun for sure. But I think that like if we think about stable, sustainable businesses, like it's going to be another way to get access to capital, like outside of VC. If there's a gap there, it's going to be through enterprises and building enterprise solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I think one sector that we're personally, this is outside of my existing business, really excited about is DeepIn. I think, and the reason being is I think there's more of like a confluence of sort of like macro factors, right? With basically US and potentially Europe restricting Chinese manufactured technology items. And then you have this massive market in Southeast Asia. You have all these manufacturers in China that's trying to get their goods out. And you basically have DeepIn, which is like, kind of like the Internet of Things 3.0, right? I mean, you're already seeing like Chinese EVs now in like, like Singapore and maybe even Malaysia. I think that's just the start, right? I think if whoever can sort of leverage sort of that trifecta of like token incentives, physical infrastructure, on-chain, and basically Chinese manufacturing, I think that's actually going to be like a pretty interesting sweet spot.
DeepIn for sure, right? I think that's one of the hypotheses from a lot of the folks who are building on Solana is that the next billion users really isn't going to come from a consumer app. It's not going to come from something like that Instagram moment for Web3, but it's probably going to come from DeepIn. It's probably going to come from, an infrastructure project that millions upon millions of people will start using, and all of a sudden, I can get some tokens out of it. What about gaming? I mean, gaming seems to be very innate to the ecosystem here. I know a lot of game developers that develop games specifically for the Philippine markets or the Vietnamese markets, and those games are developed, both in China, Japan, and the rest of, and even in the West.
I think gaming is one of the easiest onboarding for the mass adoptions for the next round. We experienced a lot of past couple cycles. We saw there's quite boring games, but we also experienced something like really potential upside like a Steppen. And then on this cycle, I think we're actually seeing a lot of studios building like real games. People enjoy playing the games. I think that's like going back to the root of the cause. It's like people want to play a game to kill time, to enjoy. It's not trying to make money, but making money is on the side is also great. So gaming, I think, is one of the most important one. On the side, I think there's a Play With Me, that kind of like social gaming project as well. It's like crypto become like not the mainstream in the project, but like on the as a assistant or as a tool on the side. So people while they play in the game enjoy it, but they also can use the crypto as a mean of payments or a mean of like part of the ownership in the game. So that will actually changing the whole setup for the original like GameFi stuff. I think that will make a huge change. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Let me kind of round this off and talk about the differences in regulatory issues or how the law, which countries in the APAC region do you think has really great crypto laws? Because I think if you compare it to the West, right? I mean, you've got these politicians who are very anti-crypto. There's a lack of a regulatory framework. And I think that's kind of one of the advantages for some of these Southeast Asian countries to kind of be the model for the world. I mean, you saw Raymond from MDEC get up here earlier, and he talked about, yeah, they didn't understand about Web3, but now because of the people in this room, they're going to make a concerted effort towards Web3. I think the Philippines, in my opinion, is probably one of the best regulatory environments for crypto. Can you talk a little bit about like the Philippines regulatory environment and why you think it's a great country to do business in for crypto?
I could talk for this for hours, but like if you look at all of Southeast Asia, I'll give like a big picture overview. Like there's about 5 countries or 6 countries in Southeast Asia that currently have live crypto exchange regulation, right? Like Indonesia being the biggest, and then Philippines, the second biggest country, and then Thailand, and then Malaysia, and then Singapore, right? 5 countries. I think Vietnam's kind of like China right now. Yeah. It's kind of like no man's land, but they don't really care as much. The rest of it, I think, is a little bit too small to sort of matter. Of these countries, I think, like, you have different regulators regulating it. And in Philippines is the central bank, and Thailand is the SEC, Malaysia is the SEC, Indonesia, they're moving from the commodities regulator to the Ministry of Finance. So in the Philippines, having the central bank regulating it means before it moves over to the SEC, means that sort of like this whole like security token, utility token is not that big of a deal, right? Which is kind of gives us as an exchange a lot of flexibilities when we list tokens, right? We got basically all the meme coins listed. Yeah, so we're really excited. Our users like it. And because they view meme coins, to a certain extent, that's kind of like a lottery ticket, right? So sort of like, that's one, right? Why Philippines is still attractive, I think we have large number of people, like I mentioned before. And then for Coins, our app, you can actually basically use it to day-to-day payment because we're an EMI, e-wallet, as well as a crypto app. So you can use it to, buy coffee, buy crypto, or send it to other places, right? And the last point that's kind of interesting is that for Philippines specifically is that we're a big remittance intaking country. So stablecoin usage is actually massive in the Philippines, or starting to. And yeah, I mean, just regulatorily, sort of like a good balance between sort of like there are regulation, but the thing is that we actually have a large degree of flexibility under the regulation. To basically try new things.
So why do you think that, just to continue off that point, why do you think the Philippines has such great laws surrounding crypto versus, say, the United States or China or Vietnam?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to sort of there are no incumbents. Like if you look at sort of like the banks in the Philippines, it's pretty antiquated, right? Like they're starting to come out with digital banks. Like if you use like a banking app, like, up until like 2 years ago, they still didn't work after, the banking app did not work after banking hours because they did not have physical people to process the stuff, right? So I think sort of the stance is that, hey, we don't really know that much about this stuff, but as long as you guys can help keep the bad actors out, let's see if we can sort of push the envelope on nation building, right? Because right now, like, we got a sandbox approval to issue a stable coin from the central bank. And this is like the first one I know of globally where a central bank has allowed a private entity to issue a stable coin. Like, I mean, it's under a sandbox regime, but I haven't seen that in any other countries, right?
Well, speaking about sandboxes, everybody's looking at Hong Kong right now because if Hong Kong succeeds, liquidity from China comes back into the business, and I think that's good for everybody. So what's happening in Hong Kong right now?
Yeah, my observation is Hong Kong is actually trying really hard to go, regulating crypto exchange, RWA, stablecoin. These are the main stream for the 3 assets or things. I think it's coming in a long way. It's going to a very positive trajectory, but still, I think it's not there yet. It's not as advanced as like I think Singapore or like even like Philippines, because which is more open up. I think Hong Kong has a legacy connections with like the mainland China. There's that effect, but overall, I feel like Hong Kong is a good spot. Still has the liquidity, even though it's not that as much, but it's a good spot just to doing business. And also, if you want to connect them with the mainland China, which has a huge user asset base, it could be the place to be. And if you're building like a stablecoin or RWA, I think that's the place to be. So hopefully the whole thing going well for the long run, and become another important asset or like hub for the region.
Yeah, I'll give you like an anecdote. So I have friends in China that are going to Hong Kong to pay anywhere between $10,000 to $20,000 to open a bank account in Hong Kong.
Right.
So they can have a legal on and off ramp.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's
For sure. For sure. For sure. So how about Malaysia? Tell us, for all the builders out here thinking about possibly going to Malaysia, going to Singapore, what is the advantage of starting a crypto business out here?
To be honest, our Jupiter is not technically a Malaysia company. Like most of us are Malaysian here, but we are. Yeah, I mean that's what. But to be fair, Malaysia, I think it's still in the state of like experimenting, like a lot of things. Like there's a few exchanges popping up, and then there's a few like new chains popping up as well. That's experimenting things, working on things. So I would say Malaysia is still relatively early in the space, and
But it's a safe place to open up a
oh yeah,
Web3,
yeah, for sure.
right? Like in Vietnam, for example, you don't get taxed on crypto gains, right? I think so, right? You don't get taxed on crypto gains. So that's a good thing about Vietnam, right? But it's a gray market, right? It's a very gray market. It's difficult to really, it's great to open a crypto Web3 company in Vietnam if you just want to open it for the rest of the world, right? You got companies like Bird Eye, you got companies like Coin.98, KyberSwap. However, if you wanted to do something with consumers within the country, very, very difficult because of that gray area overhang. So it's not necessarily the best place in the world if you wanted to create a consumer business. How about Singapore? Why should someone go to Singapore to start a Web3 company?
I feel like although Web3 is like very online, like I think there is some value. Like if you look at how, Silicon Valley in the US developed, it's because there was such a high exchange rate of ideas because everyone was kind of clustered in the same area. And in Singapore, it'll literally be like, someone like a CoinHako 2 streets down from like a Treehouse Finance. So like the density of startups and Web3 startups in particular just breeds innovation. It breeds exchange of ideas. It's a very close-knit community. Everyone is just 2 doors down. It's really easy to say, do you know so-and-so? Absolutely, let me connect you. So that just accelerates like the rate at which we can, brainstorm. We can learn from each other. I think that's one of the biggest values of being in Singapore and Singapore being small, basically.
Of all the countries we just talked about, who has the best relationship with institutions, right? Vietnam, definitely not the best relationship with institutional partners like banks, big industry. But how about the Philippines? Like you guys have lots of relationships in the banking sector, in the industrial sector.
And yes and no. I mean, like the top 2 or 3 banks still wouldn't bank our business, although we're both licensed by the central bank, right? We still have to work with I wouldn't say like the next tier of banks. This is where the advantage of for us, we're an e-wallet ourselves. We can actually custody fiat directly, right? So you don't have to sort of move your money to a bank to be able to spend it, right? So and then once the stable coin comes out, we're gonna give people returns on that stable coin. So we're gonna actually present an alternative to keeping your money in a bank, right? I think, but I think in the region, I would say a country like Thailand probably has the best institutional support.
The second biggest bank, right? Bought and exchanged.
And I mean the big banks there are what is it? The King's Bank, right? They bank crypto. So it's so it's SCC, right? Or SEB, right? So and then so I think and then Thailand as a whole, I think is a much more probably the most sophisticated country behind Singapore in Southeast Asia, just from a financial penetration perspective. So you basically have a lot more capital that's sort of available and being deployed there.
Yeah, but I think if you compare those countries to, again, like the United States or Canada, so far ahead, light years ahead in terms of.
But I think like from an institutional adoption perspective, I think U.S. is still ahead. Like just from like big money, big ticket, like smart money. Like it's like if I talk to institutions,
PayPal, Visa.
No, it's like BlackRock's of the world, right? Like hedge funds here in Southeast Asia aren't really looking at Bitcoin or launching ETFs the way sort of like BlackRock, Fidelity, Franklin Templeton, it's kind of doing that in the U.S.
Those are kind of boring, right? They're not as fun as the stuff that's happening.
But like those are big checks, that's big amount of liquidity coming into the market.
Okay, does anybody have anything else? Right? Well, thank you so much. Thank you, speakers, for coming out for this panel. It's extremely informative. I personally learned quite a bit. Thank you guys for listening. Take care.